In this video, I'm going to be building out a ad copy research agent. So I'm going to be building this absolutely from scratch. So you can watch me go through troubleshooting issues while building out agents and just see the typical timeline and process for going through and building out an agent from start to finish. So if there's any slow points or anything like that, please feel free to skip through them to get to the actual content. So just to get started, the first thing I'm going to do, well, I always talk to the agent, and also, just by the way, this is Claude code. It's just the terminal version. It moves significantly quicker, but you can replicate my exact processes in the Claude code app. There is no significant difference outside of this. Just uses less processing power on my computer, so I can run multiple things at the same time. So first things first, I always talk to the agent about exactly what I'm looking to accomplish. So I'm looking to build out a agent or skill that all of my contractors and I are able to use in order to quickly and effectively do ad copy research on what our competitors in whatever industry we are in are currently doing on Google Ads and Meta Ads. To start off, I would like to just research what our competitors are doing in Google Ads, both by doing searches for the exact keywords that we are going to be showing for, and by looking through Google Ads Transparency Center for our direct competitors and the types of ads that they are showing. Then I would like to aggregate all of this data and come up with some high-performing headlines that will either allow us to replicate what the competitors are doing and seem to be continuing to do because it works, or unique angles that we can bring in order to better address the market and get better performance out of our ads. One thing that I've been wanting to do lately is to better speak to the actual person seeing the ad rather than just throwing a bunch of keywords and boilerplate talking points about the product. I want to speak to the actual emotion of the customer, or what they are actually thinking or feeling when searching for this product, and actually speak to why they would actually want to learn more about the product or service rather than just kind of the standard straight down the middle boring ad copy. And so I'll pause it while it loads and goes through a lot of this stuff, but essentially I just kind of ramble on for a little bit, talking through what I'm thinking as I'm kind of brainstorming out loud with the AI, so that way it can get a better idea of what I'm actually looking to accomplish. Another thing, if it doesn't do it for me, I'm going to ask it to interview me to make sure that it asks enough questions to get the best possible idea of what I'm looking to try to accomplish, and then put together a plan first for how to build this out before launching it and just straight up building it, because you do want to go through and make sure that it is giving you the output and it is putting together the output in a way that makes sense and isn't just some AI generated slop. You can't just say yes to everything. You do want to take your time to go through everything. And another thing is you want to try to keep this as simple as possible and save you as much time. You want to essentially take away 80% of the work and leave the additional 20% for maybe some manual entry that allows it to not burn through a bunch of AI credits, because those are becoming more expensive and you need to be efficient with your workflows, especially when it's something that you can do in 5 seconds for it that would take it 10 minutes to process and try to find. And so you really want to take out the chunk of the task that is causing you to spend the most amount of time on any given task. So in this specific example, when we're building out something to do ad copy research, I would want to provide it with exactly where to look for any given client's information. So rather than just saying, hey, go find Aura Display's information, and then it goes and spends 10 minutes trying to find that in the database, building that into the brain and saying, hey, here's exactly where I want you to look for that information. Here's exactly where I want you to look for their competitors, and here's where I want you to look for their keywords. Or maybe you provided a few keywords when you're running this agent, rather than, hey, go to my ads account and try to find some of the top performing keywords. It can do that, and that may be something you want to do in version 3, 4, or 5. But when you're first testing it out, that's not the big chunk of the problem. The thing that takes you a lot of time, you kind of already know the keywords that you want to show for. You don't know what the best copy is. There's hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of different pieces of ad copy, and you need this to pull that in and analyze it for you and give you the best recommendation. You don't need it to spend a bunch of time going in and finding the exact keywords that you want it to do this research for, even though it definitely can. Start by solving the first initial problem, scope that out, make sure that it's solving that specific issue, bring in all the other pieces manually, then you can start automating the bringing in of manual pieces once the core of the product works, because most of the time you don't want to over-engineer it. You want to try to keep it as scoped in as possible, so that way it saves you the most amount of time without you spending a ton of time actually building it out. So this right here is fantastic. It's looking in the exact places that I want it to, and it has a secondary option for if it doesn't get provided all the data that it needs. This type of analysis is exactly what we're looking for. We could obviously specify and say there are more specific analyses that we want it to perform on all the data that it brings in, but for our examples here, I think that'll work. The output right here is exactly what we're looking for. If you wanted to output it into a Google Doc or something like that, you could specify that here. The tools needed that it's going to use, a big thing that I would want it to be using is Claude and Chrome. That is typically the go-to, and a lot of times you will get recommended that by the agent builder agent that we have in order to find a lot of this data. Supabase is always going to be useful for the agents we build out, because that's where our Creekside brain lives. So making sure that it's able to, store the knowledge for later use, and additionally go and find information on the specific client, so that way it can not only pull information from the web, but also information directly from all of our internal sources as to what's important to the client, any other specific unique value propositions, all that fun stuff. And so here we go. We have 2 questions right here. Typically, I like it to ask me a little bit more questions than this. So after I answer these questions, I'm going to ask it to interview me. If you want data stored for later, obviously storage is important. In this case, we just want it to output it one time for us to review. And then if we like any of the information, we can tell it, hey, store these specific copies. But we don't want it to store everything, because right now it's aggregating data and giving us its best possible solutions or best possible copy. But not all that copy is going to be worth storing, because we still want a human to go in and review what makes sense for that business. Scope for V1. And then that's another thing this is a great question by it, is making sure that we stay narrowly scoped. We should probably avoid doing meta ads library right now. We want to stay specifically scoped to the Google Ads Transparency Center and just Google search, because those are same platform, should have similar, should work in similar fashions. Ads Transparency Center on Meta, maybe a little bit more difficult, and we don't want it to be breaking in multiple pieces or multiple parts. We want to solve each thing one step at a time. So we will tell it all that. For now, I don't want to hold on to any of this in storage, and our scope for V1, let's just focus on pulling in data from the Google Ads Transparency Center and from Google search for the specific keywords that we are looking to design ads for. Okay, perfect. Now it's created the version 1 of the agent. Like I always say, QC it before doing anything else. Sometimes you can QC it and stress test it at the same time. I've also run into issues where you QC it and stress test it at the same time, and QC works fine, but then it stress tests it and breaks. And so I'd rather solve any of the hypothetical issues via QC first, and then move on to stress testing it. For something like this, you don't really necessarily need to stress test it, you just need to actually test it. Stress testing often works when you are doing something like, hey, I need you to review 1,000 phone calls and see what type of, and summarize each one of them. You could say stress test it, and it'll stress test it and run it through like 20 phone calls for you, rather than you waiting for it to run through all 1,000 to see if it's actually going to work. Or another agent that I'm building up here that I like using stress test on is something where it essentially takes all my Fathom call transcripts and turns them into action items, and so that's going to have different variables and different outputs every single time, and so I needed to stress test it against a dozen different variations to see if there's any breaking points that we need to then fix, rather than me telling it manually, hey, fire it on this Fathom account. Hey, now fire it on this Fathom call over and over again. It can go in and manually test it against a bunch of different scenarios. And this is exactly why you QC it. It found 5 issues before even us testing it. It saves us a lot of time. So now we're going to say run it and see what happens. Perfect. So it is providing us with the questions that it needs answered in order to run properly. So we're going to do this for a dental practice that we're absolutely murdering it for out in California. The niche is dental aesthetics, specifically a business that focuses in porcelain veneers for high-income individuals. The keywords that we are bidding on are no-prep veneers and porcelain veneers. The name of the business is Dr. Lale Dental Aesthetics. You can go and find her competitors first, and she operates out of LA, California. So, once again, it did say competitors were optional, and it can go in and find some of that stuff. If you wanted to save it time from going in and doing that research, you could probably do a very quick Google search to find some of the competitors for it, and then have it go in and do all of the other grunt work that's going to take forever of combing through hundreds of pieces of ad copy. But we're going to see if it will free us up some of the time by going in and finding the competitors for us. Another thing is a lot of this information in the Creekside brain already is stored there, and so if you tell it the exact business that we were doing this research for, it can go in and find that information in the database. If it doesn't go in and do that, or it doesn't do a very good job, you may want to go in and improve that portion of it, improve its recall from the database, and just say, hey, where are we pulling information from about our clients or about the person we're researching? Are we searching the database for it? Are we only searching in just a couple of different tables, or are we searching the entire brain for this information? So that's something that I'm going to add in as well. So here's the prompt that we're going to be using, and as you can see, it's opening Chrome for us automatically. Go ahead and hit enter on this right here. We'll let this run in the background. And your computer may freeze up a little bit when it's doing something like this for you, so I often recommend moving this to a different tab inside your computer so it's not on your screen, because as it's actively trying to use your screen, that's obviously going to use up a lot more processing power on your computer. Yeah, and it froze the video while I was doing that. Is essentially, if your computer isn't just absolutely insane, it will, especially if it's running front and center, it will freeze up your computer quite significantly. So just make sure it's always running in the background if you are running into some of those issues. But do not exit out of the tab. That will obviously stop whatever process it's going through. This right here is the reason why connecting to the brain is so useful, is it can pull this data automatically from all of our interactions with Dr. Lale. And so it was able to make some clarifications to our ad copy research. As I always do with every agent that I create, I always tell it to QC it. So we'll QC it, but first we're going to answer these questions. Let's add the phase 0. And let's do number 2 as well. Then QC it. Now that it's pretty much ready to go, and this one was a simpler build out with less issues, one thing I always like to do is double check the output that it gives me by asking it to present exactly the quantity of information it found and where it found it from, because you don't want it to just have searched through say one competitor and only looked at 5 ads and then said, oh, there's a massive gap here, when in reality, if it actually did its job and did more research, it would have found the correct information. I need to double check that the output that was created was generated on quality input. Please tell me the amount of data that you collected, how many competitors you found, how many ad copy variations you looked at, and where you found this data from. And this output is exactly why I like to double check that. As you can see here, it was unable to pull data from the Transparency Center ads. It was able to pull, it was able to find actual competitors, 7 competitors. That's pretty solid. The actual ad copy that it pulled from was not great. It mainly just looked through just website copy. And so that's why it's always helpful to review the sources, even if it should be obvious. Hey, it should have only looked at Google search and Ads Transparency Center. It can infer things incorrectly if you don't double check the output. So even though the output looks really good, the data it was based on was not very solid. And so that's why, because this agent will be super helpful in the future for building additional advanced agents, like building something out that can go in and do a competitor and build a report and show actual data that it found. If it's not actually finding any data, it won't actually be able to do that report, and the output will be lacking. So we're going to critique it and go from there. We need to make sure that there's a minimum number of ads that it reviews. Quite frankly, it should be reviewing hundreds of ads and hundreds of ad copy. Finding 7 competitors is solid, but we need to find significantly more data from the Ad Transparency Center and significantly more ads from our Google search. It doesn't necessarily just have to be Google search ads. It can also find some of the top content for those keywords under organic SEO if no ads appear when we do a Google search. So this is all things where utilizing your knowledge and your intelligence regarding whatever topic you're building around is going to be very helpful, because AI is very much average, and if you don't instruct it and provide a whole lot of context to how you would go about doing something like this, it won't necessarily understand. And it will just go along the easiest path because that's the most predictable path. And so if you want it to do specific things, you've got to set specific guardrails. For example, it needs to review, say, hundreds of pieces of ad copy. It didn't know that before. It reviewed only a couple. One thing from building agents out like this that I know it may have an issue with is in the Transparency Center. Oh, it's not pulled up. In the Transparency Center, it doesn't necessarily show the ads as plain text. It shows it more like a screenshot. So it's possible that it isn't able to directly copy the text directly off the landing page. It may have to essentially visually view it, which is a little bit more complicated for AI agents. So essentially what I'm going to do, double check that the code that we wrote will actually be able to pull data from the Transparency Center ads. And essentially, I'm just double checking to make sure that the way it has structured its process will actually work and do what I want it to. So that's exactly what I predicted, is that it would need to screenshot and zoom to read all of the ad copy, because it just didn't work to try to read the page itself. And there were also some additional things, like trying to search by advertiser's name didn't work. You have to search directly by the domain, but that's why you have to go through this testing process, is AI doesn't know how to do everything correctly the first time. You gotta teach it and train it. Another thing to note is actually going through the flow yourself can sometimes be helpful. So if you try to do it the way the AI would, so essentially if we go, let's see, results. So it would typically look up, say, a URL for any given ad. We see the ad popping up here. We click into it to look at it, and we could see all the ads that this advertiser has produced. Trying to click through into each one of these ads to see more details. So when we click in, we can actually see that there may be the possibility to just take, I was just seeing, essentially if you can highlight the text on the screen, that means that the AI can pull it directly from the website as opposed to taking a screenshot. However, it does not seem like that is the case. So our current setup that it has for us right here is good. So we're going to have it test it again. And that's one thing about this, is to do it right, sometimes it just takes a while. And so this one took about 30 minutes to run on its own, but it runs in the background. You don't have to do anything. And it shows you kind of the difference between the two runs. And now it's kind of showing us where it is still lacking and where we can continue to improve. There is always going to be improvements that can be made on any agent that you make. You can make it faster, you can make it process more data, all that sort of stuff. But that's why we start with V1. If V1 is helpful enough, then we can move on to V2 to improve the output of that current result. So now that we've got that, we're going to do one final query. Just ask it, what are the 15 best headlines that you would recommend, and explain why each one of them is relevant and valuable. And then we can also have it store a lot of this data in a database, like I mentioned, so that way in the future, if you need more examples for ad copy, it can go through and pull some examples very easily. And perfect, now it's outputting recommendations and explaining exactly why each one of those recommendations is relevant, and then we could continue to build off of this. So that's pretty much how to build an agent from start to scratch. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.